Trump's big, beautiful, or butt ugly bill has passed. What even is this thing? We've tried trickle-down economics for multiple decades at this point, and at no point, at any point in time, has this ever worked. I don't think people realize that Donald Trump and this administration do not care who you are. Nearly 16 million individuals could lose their health insurance. Just because you're not on Medicaid doesn't mean this doesn't impact you. So I guess the US is going from broke to broker. What's up, rich friends, and welcome back to another episode of Networth and Chill. I'm your host, Vivian 2, aka your rich BFF and your favorite Wall Street girly. As you may have heard, Trump's big, beautiful, or butt ugly bill, depending on who you ask, has passed. A lot of people are really scared and confused about what this bill actually means for them. I mean, with roughly 1,000 pages, it's not exactly light reading, and it's not easy for people to understand what this bill even covers, let alone how it'll affect them. As a quick note, as you listen to this episode or watch this episode, just note that we are using best estimate numbers from policy firms, from research institutes. That said, the true impact of this bill will not fully be understood until we actually start to see some of these changes implemented, but these are some of the rough estimate numbers that we have been able to find. So today, I'm breaking down the one big, beautiful bill, what it means for you, and when you can expect to see some of these changes come into play. Let's get into it. So first off, what even is this thing? The Big Beautiful Bill, officially known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, is a comprehensive budget reconciliation law that was just passed by Congress and signed into law by President Trump on July 4th, 2025. It's Trump's landmark legislation with a lot of the policies he's been touting on the campaign trail all rolled into one giant document, and by giant, I really do mean giant. It's almost 1,000 pages. For a quick summary, it's essentially a $4.5 trillion package combining tax cuts, spending cuts, and additional border security measures. This bill is expected to increase our national debt by $3.4 trillion over the next decade, according to the Congressional Budget Office. As a reminder, we are currently $36.2 trillion in debt, so I guess the US is going from broke to broker. Cue Brokey by Lotto. So what is the bill? It's basically a giant bill. Haha, get it? But This bill was super contentious on both sides of the political spectrum, but despite all the initial pushback, it passed, so now we're stuck with it for the time being. What are the biggest changes? Before we get into what it all means, we have to look at some of the high-level changes people can expect with this bill. So first up, tax breaks. This bill contains about $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, which, if you were following Trump's campaign, is pretty much in line with what he promised his supporters. This bill includes a slight increase in the child tax credit from $2,000 to $2,200. It's worth noting that this tax credit is only available for people making between $2,500 and $200,000 for single filers and up to $400,000 for joint filers. There's also an increased cap on state and local tax deductions, SALT deductions, which is now $40,000, up from $10,000. This basically allows people to decrease their federal taxes owed by taking out what they have already paid to their state. There's also a new temporary tax deduction for tips, overtime work, and auto loans. There's lots of business-related tax cuts in this bill, including up to 100% deductions for equipment and research. Trump has also made his 2017 tax cuts permanent, which reduced the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. These rates were previously set to expire, but will now continue. What I want to emphasize here is that while at first glance, all of this sounds great, there are loads of stipulations and caveats and exceptions and, oh, by the ways, on every single one of these changes, which will dictate who is and isn't eligible. It's not quite as simple as these blanket statements might make it seem. So it's important to acknowledge that depending on where you fall in income level or wealth scale, you may have more or less access to these new benefits. Moving on to immigration, Trump has decided to dump buckets, and I mean buckets of money, into anti-immigration tactics. This includes $350 billion for the completion of his border wall and to create 100,000 beds in deportation camps. Trump is also looking to hire thousands of new border control officers with signing bonuses. Yes, you heard me right. We are now providing signing bonuses for border control officers. This is incredibly disturbing on so many levels. We are literally diverting funds for the sole purpose of kicking people out of the country, some of whom are actual citizens or on their way to becoming legal citizens. Furthermore, this mass roundup of humans being put into detention and deportation centers is just deeply inhumane. It's your neighbor, your friends, a parent from your kid's school, and even just random people who fit the visual bill. Moving on to defense, this bill adds about $150 billion to the defense budget, with $25 billion going to a new Golden Dome missile defense system. What is the Golden Dome, you may ask? It's a U.S. missile defense system similar to Israel's Iron Dome, but it's gold because Trump. I've talked about this before, but we spent close to $1 trillion with a T dollars last year on defense, so it seems like the trend of our increased defense spending is going to continue. Now switching gears, let's talk a little bit about the major cuts to Medicaid. To help compensate for reduced tax revenue from high-income individuals, Republicans are targeting cuts to Medicaid. This bill cuts about $1 trillion from Medicaid over the next decade and is also implementing a $35 copay for people using Medicaid. One thing that I've recently seen in news headlines that I found to be incredibly disturbing, there was a person who said that they voted for Donald Trump to spite the liberals and to make the snowflakes cry. And unsurprisingly, then they found out that they were actually the ones being harmed because their Medicaid was being cut and they weren't going to have access to their life-saving medication. And that person is now basically attempting to use GoFundMe as their health insurance. I don't think people realize that Donald Trump and this administration do not care who you are. If you are not rich, they see you as collateral damage. So I'm deeply disturbed by that. But I think it is very important to acknowledge that there will be changes to Medicaid coming. Now that we've talked about medicine, let's also talk about food. There are some cuts to Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the SNAP program. $186 billion has been cut from SNAP, which helps low-income folks with food assistance. I think this is going to become a major problem because people do need to eat, but I'll give you my opinion on that a little bit later in this episode. Now, that's certainly not everything in the bill, but it's some of the most important items that will have direct financial consequences for you. Before you start saying, Vivian, this is not going to affect me, just hear me out. Let's talk a little bit about who's actually benefiting from this monstrous bill. Surprise, surprise, it's the usual suspects, meaning the wealthy and big corporations are going to see the majority of the favorable aspects from the bill. Corporate America is overjoyed. Corporations are going to be able to save majorly with these permanent corporate tax cuts and increased opportunities for write-offs. While the hope is that this stimulates the economy, it also leaves the U.S. with less revenue from the taxes of the largest corporations. My concerns here are that we've tried trickle-down economics for multiple decades at this point, and at no point, at any point in time, has this ever worked. When corporations and the ultra-wealthy make more money, that money doesn't trickle down to middle-class and working-class consumers. It gets hoarded. CEOs get paid more. Compensation packages for C-suite executives get bigger. But these corporations don't pass this money back on to the little guy. Similarly, in line with corporations, manufacturers can now fully deduct costs of new manufacturing facilities built between January 2025 to 2029, plus get enhanced semiconductor tax credits. So if you're a manufacturer, this is likely going to benefit you. Additionally, high-income American taxpayers earning $1 million or more per year will see about a 3% increase in their take-home pay because of tax cuts, according to CNBC. This translates into about an additional $75,000 in 2026, according to the Tax Policy Center. This bill is certainly a win for the 1%. And I've been very honest in saying this, that financially, this bill is a win for people like me. That doesn't mean it's good for America. And ultimately, even if the richest people in this country continue to grow and grow their wealth, a country is not healthy financially if we don't have a strong middle class. Speaking of another sector of working folks that is going to benefit, Tip-based workers. Under a program called No Tax on Tips, tip workers such as restaurant servers, barbers, and drivers would be able to deduct up to $25,000 in qualified tips. So this would provide some seriously immediate financial relief. I do just want to stress that this does not mean no taxes on tips. It means that you are able to not pay taxes on the first $25,000 worth of tips that you receive. The slogan of the scheme is just a touch misleading, so I want to make that really clear. Additionally, workers who work overtime will also receive a tax break up to $12,500 for a single person or $25,000 if you're filing jointly. So again, another group of winners here. For both tax and overtime, the ability to deduct these starts to phase out once you hit $150,000 as a single filer or $300,000 if you're filing jointly. Your ability to deduct goes down by $100 for every $1,000 you make over those limits. If you're wondering if you qualify, professions that will benefit from this are defined in the bill as food and bev workers, barbering and hair care, nail care, aesthetics, and body and spa treatments. Additional professions outside of some of these very basic ones that do receive tips are subject to further review from the IRS and might not get this benefit. In my mind, I feel like this was very much deliberately written this way to leave out potential folks like dancers or sex workers or folks that may have jobs that the IRS may deem suspicious, quote unquote. Important to call that out. It's unfortunate, but definitely something to keep in mind. Another group of folks who are going to benefit, high tax state residents. Since the SALT tax deduction has gone up to $40,000, those in high tax states like California and New York could see lower federal taxes because when they are calculating the actual number that their taxes for the federal government are calculated off of, they will already be deducting how much they've spent on state and local taxes. So this would likely leave more money back in their pockets. Now, onto a darker half of this conversation. Who loses with this bill? Spoiler alert, it's our most vulnerable. Who's going to be hurt? Well, low-income people and families, rural communities, older adults, people with disabilities, students from middle-class and working-class families, and our environment stand to lose the most with this bill. Here's the breakdown of what these communities could expect. For low-income families, first and foremost, Medicaid cuts. With approximately $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid over the next decade, nearly 16 million individuals could lose their health insurance by 2034. This is particularly critical for families who rely on Medicaid for medical care and services. It's also important to note that with these cuts to Medicaid, obviously those lower income families stand to lose the most, but it also means medical procedures and visits are about to get more expensive for everyone, meaning you. The cuts to Medicaid would destabilize the healthcare system, harming providers and increasing uncompensated care for patients from hospitals. When more people become uninsured, when they have medical emergencies, hospitals absorb the cost of treating patients in emergency situations, which then gets passed on to other patients and insurers. So it's not just people who rely on Medicaid who are going to potentially see increased healthcare costs. Plus, if you don't have insurance, you're less likely to go in for preventative care because it costs more. So you're only going to get treated in emergency situations. The healthcare system is interconnected. When one part of that system, like Medicaid, gets cut severely, it affects the entire system's ability to serve all patients, regardless of their insurance status. I cannot stress this enough. Just because you're not on Medicaid doesn't mean this doesn't impact you. Poor people don't stop having medical emergencies. They just stop being able to afford them. When hospitals eat these costs, they get passed on to paying patients. Furthermore, if people can't afford routine medical care, they stop going, which might make it hard for your rural hospital or medical center to keep the lights on. You end up in a medical provider desert because other people can't afford to see a doctor. Now, back to that SNAP conversation we were discussing earlier. With these SNAP cuts, 22.3 million families stand to lose some or all of their SNAP benefits, according to the Urban Institute, a nonpartisan research and policy center. The main reason people are at risk of losing access to SNAP is not just because of the budget cuts, but also the changes in qualifications, specifically the new work requirements. Under the new requirements, adults aged 55 to 64 without dependent children, as well as parents whose youngest child is 14 or older, must work at least 20 hours weekly or enroll in job training programs. The previous age limit was 54, so this would potentially impact about 900,000 adults who weren't previously subject to these work mandates. That's almost 1 million people who are at risk of losing access to affordable food. With this new work requirement, it'll impact those who have disabilities and those who are older, but maybe don't qualify for disability assistance. They'll still be forced to work to keep this benefit or risk losing their access to food. I know people are like, well, if they're getting this access, they should be working. Call me when you find somebody who is actively hiring seniors with disabilities. It is very, very hard to find a job in this current market. And furthermore, many of these folks who are working may not have the right resources to fill out the paperwork properly. Because they are unable to make this administrative task one more thing on their to-do list, they may lose their access to nutritious food. SNAP serves as a vital lifeline for working families struggling with low wages, seniors on fixed incomes, individuals with disabilities, or other vulnerable populations. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities analysis of 2024 USDA data reveals that nearly 2/3 of SNAP recipients live in households with children, while more than 1/3 are part of working families who still can't afford adequate food despite having jobs. These people don't just stop eating food. They're going to have to find new ways to get it. You thought going to the grocery store was expensive now? Wait until they have to account for a higher amount of product loss. See what eggs cost then. And overall, I am generally more concerned with crime going up as more people become more financially desperate. The people who make the worst choices aren't of a certain race, gender, age, or any other demographic. It's people who've been backed into a corner, and that's exactly what we're doing with our most vulnerable. Speaking of vulnerable communities, rural communities, hospital closures. Hello? Rural hospitals, which rely heavily on Medicaid funding, are at risk of closure due to these cuts. The National Rural Health Association estimates that rural hospitals will lose 21 cents for every dollar they receive in Medicaid funding. Additionally, this could force residents to travel long distances for healthcare, increasing health risks and costs. When you or a loved one is having a heart attack or a stroke, minutes matter, seconds matter. So the closure of these hospitals could be costing actual lives. Over 300 rural hospitals have already been identified as being at immediate risk of shutting down, with another 742 hospitals also at risk of closing. When hospitals close, everyone in that community loses access to emergency care, specialized services, and routine medical providers, regardless of their insurance status or income level. And circling back to those Medicaid cuts, for rural populations, nearly 1 in every 4 people is reliant on Medicaid for insurance. So that's a huge portion of their populations who are at risk of losing coverage. And as I mentioned before, this isn't just going to increase the cost of healthcare for people who are losing this insurance coverage, it's also going to increase costs for everyone. The loss of hospital services may lead to job losses as well and economic downturns in rural areas, affecting the overall community well-being. With fewer hospitals and clinics, there's fewer jobs for nurses, anesthetists, doctors, surgeons. And I'm not even just talking about healthcare workers. Think about the janitor. Think about the cafeteria worker. Think about the administrator or the person whose job it is to do all of the paperwork, the secretary, the person who checks people in at the front desk. All of these jobs are at risk. Now, let's talk a little bit about students, student loans, and student repayment. Well, the bill is reshaping the student loan system as we know it. One of the biggest blows for students is the elimination of the Grad Plus loan. The Grad Plus loan is a federal student loan designed for students pursuing graduate studies. The elimination of this loan could force individuals to take out private student loans, which more often than not have much higher interest rates, essentially forcing anyone who can't pay for graduate school to take on serious debt that might not even make going back to school financially worth it. Additionally, the bill puts a cap on the Parent Plus loans at just $65,000 per student, which, once again, forces people who want to go to school to take on higher interest rate loans. Pell Grants are also now limited to only full-time students. It also reshapes the income-driven repayment plan, as we know it today, making it actually less beneficial for borrowers. The Repayment Assistance Plan, RAP, is based on your adjusted gross income and number of dependent children. It also provides less flexibility on repayment for borrowers, in financial difficulty than previous income-based plans, such as Save. With these changes, you'll be able to borrow less overall and have stricter loan terms. If you don't have rich parents or family to rely on, you might be out of luck, or you'll have to take on private loans with much higher interest rates, and that's assuming you qualify. This is incredibly frustrating for me because as the child of two immigrants who really valued education still feels like one of the only true guaranteed ways to change and rise up in your socioeconomic class. Children from working class homes or middle class families won't be able to borrow enough from the federal government to get some of those good jobs, and I put that in quotes, but jobs like doctors, lawyers, fancy engineers, things that are high paying. So that access to that socioeconomic mobility has really been stymied. And furthermore, cutting Pell Grants so that only people who are in school full time really negates the value of part-time schooling for young people who may have to work, young people who may have to support their families. And this just feels incredibly unfair and in some ways very cruel. And last but certainly not least, let's talk about climate change. Our environment certainly will take a hit from this bill. This bill gets rid of a lot of clean climate initiatives, rolling back most of the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. Getting rid of that act also rolls back a lot of pollution reduction programs and initiatives, and it'll likely increase pollution in the air, leading to about 430 avoidable deaths directly associated with pollution every single year, and increasing medical bills for the average American, according to the Center for American Progress. Furthermore, this bill also eliminates the $7,500 tax credit for buying electric vehicles. My guess is Trump and Musk's breakup was so bad that he wanted to hit Musk where it hurt, in his wallet. The takeaway here is we can expect more pollution and less incentives for people to buy smart energy vehicles, and overall, people are less incentivized to go green. People are less incentivized to make smart decisions for the environment and for our future. And this just really feels like us today, folks, borrowing from our future kids, because if we don't take care of the planet now, they're not going to have one to live on in 50, 100, 150 years. Now let's talk about something that I feel like hasn't been spoken about enough. When does this bill actually go into effect? What's the timing? Well, here's the tricky part. The Medicaid cuts will not go into effect until 2027, along with cuts and changes to SNAP as well. For more immediate changes, Trump's 2017 tax benefits or tax deductions have officially been made into law and are effective immediately. Those tax cuts were set to expire this year, but now we are going to have more of them continued. No tax on tips or on overtime are temporary and are actually set to end on December 31st, 2028, before Trump leaves office. My frustration here is that the benefits, like tax cuts and deductions, kick in immediately, with some of them even ending ahead of Trump leaving office. But the policies that are likely to hurt many people and have negative outcomes and backlash don't go into effect until after the midterm elections. This worries me because many Americans don't realize this. So if there happens to be changes in our representatives during the midterm elections, some of the blame may be placed on them versus where that ire should really be directed, directly at this administration and current congressional leaders who passed this bill. TLDR, this is incredibly shady. The good stuff happens now and expires when Trump leaves, but the bad stuff only happens when there could potentially be a shift in who our Congress people are. Okay. Now on to the exciting part. We're going to go through some Q&A. I sourced these questions on my Instagram stories, and these are all questions surrounding the big, beautiful bill. If I don't get to your question, you can get on our wait list to be able to get your question answered at askdolly.com. This is going to be a tech platform where you're going to be able to get all of your finance questions answered. You're going to be able to source information from my backlog of knowledge, but also speak to a live human CFP. So check it out, askdolly.com. Let's get into these questions. Very first question. Do I tip less now that wait staff get a tax break and I don't? I don't think so. Transparently, I think your tipping should still remain the same. And the reason here is this. More often than not, folks who are in tipped professions are making below the minimum wage. That's why they are allowed to be paid with tips as well. So your server is not making $7.50. Your server is not making $15. Your server is making $2 and change. And then those tips are supplementing that income. So if you choose to tip less because of some of these policy changes, you could very literally be taking food out of their mouth. At the end of the day, I think of tipped workers in our society as some of the hardest working. I am someone who has worked unpaid internships. I know what it's like to get paid little to nothing. And for me, if I am going out to eat and I'm sitting down and resting my butt, and this person is running to and fro from the kitchen, making sure my food is warm and getting me a drink and asking and getting that side of ranch that I asked for, the least I can do is tip 20% when I go out to eat. If I am working with a beauty service provider, especially someone that I go to regularly, I think it's important to tip. It's just something that you should be doing out of courtesy. And frankly, the tipping system, I get it. You're probably tip fatigued because everybody and their mother is now asking for a tip. But I don't think that means you need to tip in every scenario. Folks who do not actually work service jobs. So, when you are going to get a Chipotle bowl or there's somebody with like an iPad there, they're actually making minimum wage behind that counter. They do not rely on tips for their livelihood. You need to think about what that person is getting paid as their base wage. I don't think you necessarily need to tip when you're getting fast casual, you're going through the line, you're picking up your lunch and you're walking out with it. But if you sit down, if you go into a salon where your stylist needs to pay for their chair, if you're going somewhere that you are really getting a service, tip. Tip generously, especially if you can afford to do it. Question number 2, the MAGA child account. Can you explain it? I'm assuming you are talking about the new Trump accounts. This is going to be a new investment account for children. So let's go over kind of the pros and cons here. First, here are the details. The federal government is allocating $1,000 for babies born between 2025 and 2028. Adults can then also contribute up to $5,000 a year into the account. The money has to be invested in a U.S. index fund, no withdrawals until kiddo turns 18, and taxes on the growth are paid when the money's taken out. The purpose of the account is for expenses tied to higher education, buying a home, or starting a small business. And while I do think this program will benefit people for 2 major reasons, 1, it's universal and automatic, so it's easy, and 2, it leverages investing starting day 1 of a baby's life, so the baby has a lot of time. It does have a number of shortcomings as well. First and foremost, from a tax perspective, it definitely isn't the most tax-advantaged account out there. The tax treatment on 529 plans and custodial Roth IRAs are better since they grow tax-free. Furthermore, Roth IRAs offer tax-free withdrawals, and you can take out contributions penalty-free at any time. And 529s offer tax-free withdrawals for educational costs, and they unlock state tax benefits in over 30 states. 2, Trump accounts are regressive, meaning rich and poor families get the same $1,000, but because rich families are more likely to keep contributing, they're likely to receive outsized benefits from these accounts. And 3, the fine print on these accounts is complicated. For example, only half of the cash value can be taken out between the kids' 18th and 25th birthdays, and no surprise, wealth building programs work best when they provide ease of use. They have to be simple. So while these accounts are going to help many families, I don't want to deny that, they're also just one more policy designed by and for the usual suspects, people who are likely already rich and least likely need the help. Question number 3. 2026 bride here. Should I take money out of my investment account now for deposits and before the market dips? Absolutely not. I do not encourage you to take out money from your investment account for your wedding. That should just be the first statement, period, blanket statement. But furthermore, I think you are making a big assumption about the market dipping and trying to time that. We don't know when that's going to happen. If it's going to happen in the next 6 months, we don't know. I wish I had a crystal ball for you. That said, I think I would be really mindful personally about making large expenditures at this point because there feels like there's a lot of economic certainty to come. What I would hate to have happen is you currently have a strong investment account. You are planning for your wedding. You take money out of that investment account to pay for that wedding. And then all of a sudden, God forbid, knock on wood, I hope it does not happen, maybe you or your partner gets laid off. And all of a sudden, not only do you not have money coming in the door, you can't even rely on that investment account when you might actually really need it for housing or food. So this is all to say, please consider having a wedding that is within your budget and does not require you to dip into your saving account, your emergency fund, or your investment accounts. Will Social Security be tax-free? Hilariously, given how much this administration has talked about it, no, Social Security will not be tax-free. That said, this bill does provide some tax relief for seniors, aka folks who are 65 or older. Qualified seniors, aka those whose modified adjusted gross income is up to $75,000 or $150,000 for joint filers, would get a $6,000 tax deduction. But long story short, overall, no, Social Security will not be tax-free. And last but not least, are we cooked? I feel like a Gen Zer submitted this one. So are we cooked? Like, yes and no. Some of these policy changes are certainly going to hurt some communities in America. Some of these policy changes are going to benefit some communities in America. And depending on where you sit and where you stand, you will either likely, be on the receiving or the receiving end of these benefits, or the end of the spectrum where you have to give up some of the things you are currently receiving. That said, here's my opinion on it. No matter who the president is, no matter what administration is in charge, they can make whatever policies they're going to make. And we have very little control over that aside from electing representatives who truly fight for our values and our needs. But we cannot dictate this policy. What you can dictate, though, is how you live your life, whether you're budgeting appropriately, whether you're setting money aside and saving it in a high-yield savings account, whether you are investing for the future. And regardless of who the president is, and regardless of what policies are passed, you should continue to make smart financial decisions for you and yours, because that is the only thing you can control. And no matter what happens, making smart money decisions is going to put you in the best possible position to have the most opportunities, to be able to make your decisions out of a place of security. And that is never going to change, no matter who is in the White House. To wrap us up today, this bill represents one of the largest wealth transfers upward in recent history. The rich are getting richer, disguised as tax relief for all. While some provisions genuinely help working people, like tip tax elimination up to $25,000, the slashing of essential social services is going to cost people in all income brackets more. The healthcare system cuts alone will create a cascade of problems affecting everyone, regardless of your income level. And when rural hospitals close and millions lose insurance, the entire system becomes more expensive and less accessible. While researching this episode, I swear I thought my head was going to explode. I just need to state that this information isn't easy to find. Yes, we can see the big headlines and the shocking numbers, but the smaller details and when things go into effect and how it's actually going to be implemented is much harder to parse through. No matter the changes, all we can do is focus on building financial stability with the tools and resources we personally have access to. I wish I could leave you on a much brighter note, but the takeaway here is don't give up. We are still in control of our own ship. We are the captain. No matter who the president is, you are still in control of your life. See you next week, besties. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Networth and Chill, part of the Vox Media Podcast Network. If you liked the episode, make sure to leave a rating and review and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Got a burning financial question that you want covered in a future episode? Write to us via podcast@yourrichbff.com. Follow Networth and Chill Pod on Instagram to stay up to date on all podcast-related news. And you can follow me at yourrichbff for even more financial know-how. See you next week. Bye!